I began my work in child welfare as a child welfare worker in Atlanta, Georgia. I had just graduated from college with a BA in sociology, and I was 20 years old. And it took me about 6 months to figure out I was serious. Well, it took me about a week to figure out I was in over my head, and about 6 months to figure out that additional training might be a useful thing. So I did my master's at the University of Washington in Seattle and did my placement at Medina Children's Services. Do any of you know? This was way back in the day when NEEKC was funding the home builders, agencies around the country to do older child adoption. And so that was my placement and my first job. So I think of adoption as being my real child welfare, first real child welfare experience. Today, we're talking about adaptive leadership. We're going to try to, I'm going to present a few things. We're going to work together in small groups a little bit. I'm very much mindful of the fact that I drew the 4 p.m. slot. I mean, really. Although we were having some debate up here earlier, and some people think the lunch slot is worse, and some people think the 1 p.m. slot is worse, but I think 4 to 5:30 is pretty bad.
They save the best for last.
Oh, yeah. But this won't be just listening. It will make some there are built-in opportunities for people to spend some time talking together. I know that there are 2, 3, maybe 4 of you who were at the Maldi meeting this summer. This is very similar to what was done there, so you're the people who might have the best excuse for ditching this particular event, or for being good leaders in your small group, since you know all about adaptive leadership. They thought they were good there for a second, right? So did any of you go to Peter Watson's thing earlier in the week on adaptive leadership? Some of you did. So this will ring a bell relative to that as well. The first thing I want to say about adaptive leadership is that it's so not rocket science. And yet, it's kind of hard to actually do a good job at. And so it's one of those things that you have to kind of get a habit of mind about and a way of looking at things in a way that's sometimes hard when you work in the kind of environments that you guys work in, mainly in states, yes, but in also private agencies. I was hearing some of the discussion earlier. In fact, as I came in, it sounded to me like you were having a conversation about an adaptive problem. So our goal here is to just talk a bit about the difference between adaptive and technical challenges, and then to talk about adaptive leadership, that is leadership skills that work in when you're working with an adaptive problem. So first, just a little groundwork. The first bullet comes from actually philosophers who talk about the difference between structured problems and unstructured problems. And it turns out that actual philosophers call unstructured problems wicked problems. I just like the name. Doesn't it sound good? It's a wicked problem. And it's kind of funny to read that in really dry philosophy texts, the wicked problems. Structured problems are problems where the answer is known. You might not know it, but somebody does. There is essentially a right answer, right? It's very structured. Would it be wise to step in front of this bus? No. That's pretty structured. Should we charge families for their home study if they're going to another state? That's wicked, actually. It turns out, because well-meaning people from different perspectives can come to different conclusions because they're working with different criteria and they have a different way of looking at it, and it's not that clear. So you might say, well, obviously, no, or obviously, yes. but there's someone else who's reasoned their way to another thing, and there's no high authority or absolute arbiter that's going to say, here's the right answer. So what we're doing when we move from thinking about structured problems to wicked problems is that you're moving from a language that's about what's right to what's better. So you have multiple options and you're trying to choose the better one. You're not trying to choose the absolute right one. Does that make sense? So much of our work is in that kind of land. And if we frame it as being all about right and wrong, then sometimes it's really hard to get to solution. Technical problems are those structured problems. So while they're challenging, they really can be solved using your existing know-how, your team. You can work your way to a solution with a group of people. It's not that they're easy. Many technical problems are kind of hard because they involve getting a lot of people together, but they don't involve those people fundamentally changing how they think about things. And adaptive problems do. They require people throughout an organization or people who are involved in dealing with that problem or issue to alter their ways, to alter the way they think about things, or maybe to learn something new and apply it to coming to a conclusion. So sometimes policy work can be technical. There's a new federal law, and there's some technical pieces to that, right? It's clear what we have to do, and now we have to figure out how we're going to do that in our system, and that's going to be hard, but some of it's going to be technical, and some of it is probably going to be adaptive, because people are going to have to think differently about something. The organization itself has to learn and behave in a little bit different way. So, technical challenges, the perspectives of the stakeholders are pretty much aligned. At least the definition of the problem seems clear. Do you ever work in situations where people don't even define the problem the same way? The definition of the problem is relatively clear. Knowledge for how to deal with it exists, and the leader can take primary responsibility and delegate and sort of say, okay, team, get this done. Right? Or the leader can say, oh, excuse me, here's how we're going to do it. Go do it this way. Adaptive challenges, people have very different perspectives. Their definitions of the problem are not always the same. It requires new behaviors or expertise. It's not exactly, you don't know going into the problem-solving process even sometimes what the framework for the solution is going to actually look like. You can't do it on your own as the leader. You can't just be like Jean-Luc Picard or any of you Star Trek watchers who used to say, make it so, number one, to his lieutenant, that you're not going to get away with make it so. What you have to do is create the environment for new learning to occur so that the group can create a solution. So how do you know you have an adaptive challenge in your organization? Difficult but really necessary change is required. The change will transform the organization in some key way. There's a big gap between the need and your current approaches. So people are going to have to learn something in order to do things differently. And what that means is people are going to have to give up things they're quite attached to and that they hold dear. So their resistance is entirely logical. Now, if you're a Star Trek, was there anybody who got the Make It So #1 reference? Yes. If so, resistance is logical, but futile. That's it, The Borg used to say resistance is futile, right? So in this case, we kind of hope resistance is futile, but sometimes it's not, because sometimes organizations really find themselves in a situation where they're really trying to make an adaptive challenge, and the resistance wins, and they suck themselves back to the old way of doing things. People talk in organizational change literature about the weebies. We be here before you got here, and we be here after you leave, and we're just waiting you out, you know? You're gonna come in, you're gonna try to make a change, but we be the ones standing at the end, not you. So it's hard to, resistance though is logical for all these reasons. People aren't resisting because they're bad people or because they are attached to the wrong thing. They're resisting because their preparation, their orientation, what they currently know and how they currently think leads them to want to stay where they are. And you're going to ask them to do something that's scary, right? To make these kinds of changes. So I'd like to turn to, a person next to you in dyads, and I want you to really quickly, this is like really fast without really thinking about it, try to list 10 adaptive challenges and 10 technical challenges, okay? And go. Okay, yes. List 10 things in adoption practice or adoption management in your kind of job that you think are technical challenges and 10 that you think are adaptive challenges, okay? You're making 2 lists, so if you're still working on your first list, go ahead and work on your second one. Okay, I'm going to pull you back together, although I can hear that you're all working very well. It's always a good sign in an exercise if it's hard to pull people back and they're actually working on the task and not, which you all are, which is, I want to thank you for 4:35 in the afternoon. Did you find that it was a little harder to distinguish between the two than you thought? Yeah, turns out to be kind of hard, and I think we'll get you to call out some things in just a second, but in the preface to that, I would say that often the kinds of problems that we face in human services, we name them at kind of a big level. And so what it means is that there are probably some technical pieces and some adaptive pieces, and that it would be helpful if you had more time to break it down a little into those two things. And it probably really is a continuum in some ways rather than just a, complete black and white or one side or the other. But it's, you have some people on your staff that love technical things, yes? And you have some people on your staff that love adaptive things. And so one thing as a manager, it's important to think about the nature of the thing that needs to happen and also about the nature of the team you put together to work on it. Because people who are big technical people sometimes hate adaptive stuff. They're like, why are we talking about this when it's obvious we should do X, right? People who love adaptive stuff will try to make everything adaptive. And some of it's just not, you know what I mean? So then you invest more time in something than you really need to. The business literature, where this stuff, the adaptive leadership language comes out of, argues that in business settings, one of the biggest problems is people treating adaptive problems as though they're technical. Trying to work with adaptive things as though they're technical, and then spinning their wheels and really getting bogged down. I think that's true in human services as well, but also in human services, sometimes we make treat technical things as though they're adaptive and create a bigger giant workroom than we actually need to maybe get the thing done. Maybe devote too much process to the technical part. Now, for many things, there's a technical piece, and then you have to implement it. And the implementation phase of something is almost always adaptive. So trying to break those things apart in your mind is not as easy as it sounds. And most things, when we first name them, are a conglomerate of problems that might have different characteristics. That's what I'm looking for. So, so what were some of your examples of technical problems? Shout them out.
Integrating a new data system.
Okay. Let's pause on that one. Anybody want to argue for adaptive? If the data and technology people, if Linda Arnold were here, she'd just be throwing a fit in the middle of the floor because they think that really all technical things are pretty adaptive. All data things are fairly adaptive. So this might be one you might want to break down. If a new law passes and you need some new data elements, that is totally technical, right? If you want caseworkers, as we did with the whole SACWA systems, to make the move from paper to computer, then, and if your new data system, like at the big level, big new data system is going to change practice in some way, then that will get adaptive kind of fast. But so that ability to try to sort out, okay, what is it? And I think there could be some debate on some of these things. And actually, sometimes if your team can have some conversation about it, even if you don't come to full agreement, you'll get pretty far down the road. Getting caseworkers to enter data. Technical problem or adaptive problem? Adaptive? Anybody want to argue technical? There could be some technical pieces to it. I mean, you can... The problem is clear, that's true. But does everyone agree it's a problem? If everyone agreed it was a problem, including those caseworkers, you might have more data in there. You know what I mean? Somebody's deciding it's not a problem, don't you think, for some reason? Or they're deciding it's not a solvable problem from their perspective, time-wise or paperwork-wise, or something. But there probably are some technical pieces to that question. As you're saying, Sharon, some data systems are easier to put data in than others. And they're more user-friendly. And if you get your data back, you're more likely to put it in. So those are all things we know how to do. But we don't always do them, but someone knows how to do them. So those parts are more technical. But then there's also kind of a practice piece going on probably with that problem that is leading you to say adaptive. So, okay, so sorry to go off on that one. Other things that were technical from your point of view? Yeah, just shout them out.
Getting finalization documents sent to the board.
Yes. You got to get 1,000 things over there. People may not do it very well, but there will be a way to do it most efficiently, right? There'll be a better way to do it. Maybe even a best way to do it. What else for technical?
Adoption assistance, eligibility.
Okay. Yes, the whole eligibility processes. Now, your original decision about whether you will do adoption assistance and how much people should get for certain things, that's a totally different issue.
We put rates, which is how much you should get.
Right.
Negotiation rates
right, right, right,
Yeah, we agree, definitely both.
yeah.
Depends on what you're talking about.
Yep. So there's another one where disentangling it's a good idea. Anything else for technical that you'd like to throw out?
What about something like budgeting?
Ooh, yeah, budgeting. Similar issue here, don't you think?
It could be, yeah.
Budgets in a no new initiative environment, probably fairly technical. Budgets in an environment where you have to make choices about what you're going to do more of and what you're going to do less of, probably adaptive. But that's not the actual budgeting part. That's the program planning part that your budget then reflects. So once you've done the adaptive work of program planning, then the budgets might be more technical. Although in our state, as Sharon knows, the formula for the distribution of resources to counties is like a 50-year adaptive challenge, right? Never solved. Only the current year's battle comes to an end, or whatever. But the implementation then of that is, how to do that is technical. How to use the elements in that formula, how to get that information and get it back, that's a technical challenge. Anything else on technical? Training? The actual delivery of training is technical. There's a better way to train stuff. There's some bad ways to train stuff. There's some better ways to train stuff. There's a good way to train stuff. We know quite a lot about how to train people. Now, what do you want to train them? That process, and Colorado just did this, went from 4 weeks of training scattered over the first year to an intensive academy right after hire. That whole process of putting together the new curriculum for the academy, people have a lot of different perspectives. They certainly do, and our group was involved with that, and Linda would just laugh. Everybody thinks they need at least 5 days of their topic, And there are like 100 people there, but we're probably not going to train them for 500 days. So choices have to be made. People have to work their way through them. Adaptive challenges you're facing.
Meeting the mental health needs of our kids. How do we do that?
Others? Yeah, talk about one where the definition of the problem is hard to nail down a little bit. Distinguishing between the bad moves from the good moves, because there are sometimes some good moves, right? Not that many, but when you're in one of those situations, you wouldn't say, well, this kid would be better stable here in this really bad situation. So, yeah, you get a little frustrated with just counting the moves is a sort of a technical answer to how to assess placement stability. I know you're talking about how to make it so. What else? Adaptive. Pardon? Say that again.
I said I would change in
State legislation. That could probably go either way too, depending on how congruent the new legislation is with the current practice. Whether it requires the organization to really make a huge move or whether it's just tweaking in a direction people would kind of agree with. But if it's a situation where people are really being asked to do something really different, then definitely. Somebody had something back here they were shouting out. Ooh, yeah. Yeah. Yes, you going to keep those siblings together or not? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, people could be in a lot of different places on that one for a lot of, could make really good arguments for a lot of different places for that one. Oh, spending incentive money? Oh, this sounds like this is a,
It would be a technical issue when you have higher ups who don't really understand that you can't spend it for something that's fully reimbursable, and everybody has their own ideas about how they need to use this money, and you kind of have to get everybody together, and one person can't just say, no, that's
right.
what you need to do. You have to get everybody on
And that's another one that has a few technical pieces to it. Like there are things you can't do, so you can't do them. So that you can sort of say that, but then that's embedded in this larger piece of, well, what is that supposed to be doing? And what are the ways you should use that money to, people may have different ideas of what it should be doing even. What, you know, so yeah, that's going to be one that's going to require people to really figure out how to work together. Well, I'm going to move along because I'm mindful of time. The take-homes here are to think about those two ends of the continuum and to realize that it's not as simple as one might think, and that you can make your life harder if you treat a technical problem as though it's adaptive, or if you treat an adaptive problem as though it's technical. So adaptive leadership then requires people to figure out how to be a good leader in a context where there are a lot of adaptive problems. And I think in human services work and in public child welfare, there are a lot of adaptive problems, right? So maybe trite old leadership model like Jean-Luc Picard on the Starship Enterprise, you think they would have figured that out by 25, wherever, you know, where he just says, make it so, I'm the strong leader, I set the direction, I delegate, I supervise. Those skills don't get you as far as you need to go with adaptive challenges, because what you have to do is create that environment you have to keep people moving, but you also have to keep them learning at the same time. So you can't manage in such a way that it shuts down their ability to learn new things. And a lot of the learning is going to happen, there's a creative piece to it. There's not a right solution, we're going to build a solution, right? So to implement it, that's going to require a lot of buy-in. So adaptive leadership challenges your own habits, beliefs, and values, and those of people that are working with you. Adaptive leaders bring attention to the hard issues. Have you ever worked in a situation where the leader liked to skip the hard issues? Adaptive leaders have to be able to bring the hard issues to the table and work with them well. To be an adaptive leader, you have to emphasize your strategic and innovative kind of mindset. So you're thinking creatively out of the box a bit, innovation, and also strategically. We need to handle this relative to this. I need for this person to figure out certain things. So you really need to be having that big picture look. It works with differences. You have multiple points of view on this. And you have to work with those differences. You can't squelch all of them but the one that you like, because that'll come back and get you. Orchestrates positive conflict. This is a skill to develop. It's not one I think I'm particularly good at, but I've worked with some people who are really good at it. They know when to bring the conflict to the table, and they know how to help people have conflict in a more positive way. so that they can move on, so that things don't just devolve into conflict. Inspires other people to challenge their assumptions and to be willing to alter the way they're deciding or thinking about things. It really requires strong relationship skills. And it requires you to be comfortable navigating changeable environments. Now, you all work in public child welfare or with a large agency or with a private agency, right? So I'm going to guess navigating changeable environments is what you do. You know, you get a new director or somebody decides to reorganize. I'm thinking these are skills that you have already, whether you say it to yourself or not. So these are just some categories of things from Martin Singhi. I think you might, I'm noticing a Harvard Business Review article, Survival Guide for Leaders. Is this something you got? Or this just, okay. This is a good, this is by, Heifetz and Linsky. Ron Heifetz's book, Adaptive Leadership. I almost brought a copy and then it was weighing my suitcase down, so I jettisoned it at home. But if you have an interest in this, the book that's just called Adaptive Leadership by Heifetz is very, very readable. It's very practical. You can read a chapter of that and you can use it the next hour. If you had time to read it over lunch, you could use that stuff in the next thing that you had to do. So I would really encourage you, it's not one of those Harvard Business Review books that kind of is for reading when you want to go to sleep. It is actually quite usable. He talks about the ability of an adaptive leader to move from the balcony to the dance floor, to be willing to be able to stand above the fray, above what's going on, and look at things from the big picture, and also to be able to be right on the dance floor working with the people who have to do the thing. And that ability to move back and forth, does that make sense, in your own perspective? To be right in the middle of it, and then also to be able to step up and look over it and see what's happening from a bigger picture is one of the main skills to begin to develop. And I would guess that most of us have one or the other of those that we're most comfortable with. Like we really like to think things in the big picture, or we really like to be in the middle of it. And so whichever one is not your natural way is the one you have to kind of help yourself develop the ability to do. Adaptive leaders work with everyone who has a stake in the problem and in the decision. And so that requires you to be able to identify the stakeholders. And the obvious ones are obvious, but they're always hidden stakeholders. They don't come to your mind immediately, but they often have the power to, not power because they're necessarily a powerful group, but they have the ability to throw a wrench into things down the road if they haven't been included. And so you have to think about who's obvious and who's hidden. And that also means bringing people into the room who are irritating. From the beginning, how many times have you put together a team and said, okay, yeah, but we can't have either that person or those people because nothing will happen. Or because they're, or just in your mind, you're like, I don't want to spend too much time with that point of view. Those folks have to come in from the beginning because I was having this conversation with this family-owned thing. It's my husband's family, not mine. Thank God, they're all a little bit crazy. But I was having this conversation about one of the, they're an adaptive challenge, they are. There's this one person who is, he is really irritating. And he's a lawyer, and he's always da-da-da-da-da. And I kept saying, he is so annoying, but he's not always wrong. You know? Sometimes he's wrong. Sometimes he's right. It's even more annoying when he's right. But we work with people, I mean, that's human nature. So you have to figure out how to get everybody in the room. You have to bring the tough questions to the group. And Heifetz talks about giving the work to the people who have to who really have to do the work, right? So not making decisions up here and then pushing them down, but giving the work to the people and then working with that group to come to solution. You have to orchestrate the conflict. So sometimes the conflict, it's not a good time, and you want to dampen it down. And then sometimes, though, it really needs to happen for the group to move on. And so you have to orchestrate that. Open a group up to new or novel, out-of-the-box solutions. That is really hard in bureaucracy sometimes, to open up and actually people be able to say, well, we could do X, which is totally outside of, which is going to cause you 50 technical issues if you made that move, but it might actually open some things up for you. Adaptive leaders are willing to experiment and learn. They're willing to try something without knowing first that it's totally going to work. And then, if it doesn't work, they're willing to say, that didn't work. Sometimes we do things and they don't work, and no one says they're not working. Or we say they're not working behind each other's backs, but we don't say it to each other. So experimenting, learning. You need to manage the environment as an adaptive leader, that in and above the fray. You can't get sucked into all the conflict or all the stuff that's going on. You have to be able to move in and out of what's happening. Heifetz talks about when you're moving back and forth from thinking about the on-the-ground piece and that balcony, looking out over things, is that it's sometimes important to move back and forth the levels between the on-the-ground and the big picture and identify at what level the conflict actually lives. Sometimes it lives with the workers. Sometimes it lives with supervisors. Sometimes the big picture group may be in the same place with the practice people, but your middle managers are not. So really thinking about where in the organization your conflict lives, identifying that. You need to court the uncommitted. This is where those relationship skills come in. You need to, there are all those people sitting on the sidelines with stuff you're trying to do. They're waiting to see how it's going to fall. And then they're going to go with whatever happens. And there's a big chunk of folks like that. They've seen a lot of change in child welfare. You need to sell to the uncommitted. You need to pull them into your process. Don't let them just sit back and say, well, yeah, let me know. And this is same thing as orchestrating the conflict, but I like the term cook the conflict. It's like, when do you want to turn it up? And when do you want it to turn it down? What you can't do is say we don't have conflict. Because in an adaptive problem, you always do. You always do. You do have conflict. Some people are better at it than others, but you always do, because that's part of the nature. Place the work where it belongs. Give the work to the group. And then this last part, manage yourself. This first one is so important, isn't it? Resist the desire for control and the need for importance. Adaptive leaders get past that. Their job is managing a process that leads an organization forward. And it's not living on ego. It can. It can. Anchor yourself. Be really clear about your values, your moral compass. What do you stand for? If this was a leadership training, we'd do a little exercise where, we'd spend some time thinking about what are the 5 adjectives I'd like people to say about me. Someone says, what's she like? What would I like the answer to be? Be clear about who you are, how you work, what you stand for. Be anchored. Have a set. You're managing and leading these complex things. You need confidants and mentors. They should not work for you, these confidants and mentors. Have you been in situations where the leader only listened to a few people? And maybe it was you, or maybe it was not you. That's a dangerous place to be as a leader if you're only listening to a few people, because you're not opening up to all the voices. You're not hearing where your conflict is. You're shutting down the information that you're getting, and you set up these weird dual relationships, friendships and dual relationships. This is a really hard thing about being a manager in organizations that are, no offense guys, mainly women in child welfare, who are, and we're relational people, you know, so you have to have good relationship skills, and you also have to have those good boundaries. And this last one, really important. Read all attacks as professional and not personal. Even if they are personal, read them and respond to them as professional attacks, always. I have a woman who works with me, Sandy Spears, and we have a colleague whom we really love, whom I won't name, doesn't work for us, but is out in the community, but who can just be God, hard to work with, you know? So you're in a meeting and you're just like, oh my God. So we went to a meeting, and this other woman had broken her ankle, and I was just being silent because if I was going to talk, I was going to be rude because I was getting mad, and Sandy was just being wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. We left the meeting. I said, Sandy, how did you manage that? She said, every time she said something that was really bitchy, I just thought, her ankle must be bothering her. And then I responded as though that were the issue, right? You know, I thought, okay, I'm not any good at that. That's why she goes to those meetings, and I don't really go to those meetings. But that's really important because not everybody works like this. So sometimes people do cross the line, and they are personal when they should be professional. And that's bad, but then the manager has to just ignore it. You kind of do. Because you have to help that, you know, and maybe you'll mentor that person in some way, or ask somebody else who has a better relationship with them. So these are skills for adaptive leaders. And so we've got, it's about 5 after 5. Okay, so let's go back to some of these two slides, if you can find them in your handout, and just think, okay, now you're faced with designing incentive. Are you all involved one way or another in designing incentive dollar program of some kind, or whatever you're going to call it? Oh. Okay, well, can you stretch your minds to pretend? Let's pretend then. I know it's 5 o'clock, but let's pretend that you all got incentive money. Because even thinking about that problem will help you think about how you would attack it had you been one of the big winners. Sorry, I wasn't following all the politics on that. So let's go with groups of, oh no, we're going to do it as a big group. Incentive dollars. It's an adaptive problem, yes, as Marilyn, you named for us. So you're in your state, you have the money, or you have the promise of the money, and you're going to have to build the program. What you going to do?
Post it up.
Pardon?
Post it up services.
Post-it up services?
Yes, if I had to.
If you had the money.
Texas got the award that our financial department dictates to us what we'll spend it on.
Oh. Well, no, that's weird. Sorry, but let's think less about what service. Though what I'm hearing in what you're saying when you moved from the service to the process is that you have a process that's making an adaptive issue pretty technical, or that a group that does not include you is dealing with the adaptive issue and then telling people how it's going to work. In an ideal world, you get to decide how the process of deciding about this money is going to work. What would you like to do? Thinking about some of these things as an adaptive leader.
I'll tell you what we did in New York. Since we were one of the first group that received a lot of money in the first 2 years, is that we came up with a policy and a procedure because we're state supervised and locally administered that specify how you spend this money on the local level.
And who was the group that made up the policy and the procedure?
The state.
The state, the state being like who in the state? Was that like one person, two people? No. Was there a work group of some kind, or was it all in kind of an administrative structure?
In a sense, there was a work group in terms of our policy and our foster care adoption folks who really got feedback from our local counties in terms of where you could use extra money, post-adoption services, adoption month activities. Basically, it was to increase recruitment and retention, to increase adoption finalization. So
let's have a discussion just on one piece here. Who are the obvious stakeholders? Okay, families, county, state.
The ones you pay, the ones that are benefiting from the dollars.
Oh, so for providers of post-adoption services. Okay, are there any hidden stakeholders? Kids. They shouldn't be hidden, but they're hidden policy-wise often. Kids. Anybody else hidden? I don't know whether they're. I'm not looking for something in particular, but.
The legislators who dictate your budget.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, except
additional money
coming in.
Right. If they see you getting the money, then they say, oh, then you don't need.
Right. Then maybe it could go somewhere else. Yeah, so if in a perfect world, you might want to have a process, whether that you have a giant work group with all these people on it, but a process where those folks are pulled in from the get-go in terms of at least knowing what your decision process is and some clear way of making input. And you probably had some kind of a process like that. Go ahead and talk with your legislature. In Colorado, it would be the Joint Budget Committee people. The staffers at the Joint Budget Committee would be maybe a hidden stakeholder that would be really important to pull in early on.
They asked, they wanted to know
They did?
when we got it and why we didn't get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let me just interject here. Alabama received a large sum this year, and in previous years, literally I was responsible for dictating where it was going and what programs it. And in anticipation of knowing that we were going to be getting a large sum, I already started setting the groundwork early in that there were programs that we said if we get funds from anywhere else that we'd expand this and got it up to the leadership. So when we got the funds and the media hit her, she was asked right away, what are you going to do with those funds? And she already had a good some commitments by what I had offered her. Yeah. So now it's in it's in print.
Okay. Did you know that she has this little sign over here? Have you been seeing this? Show them the sign. Yes. I love the sign. So I'm going to stop because she's been waving the sign at me and I haven't noticed it, I think. We could take a little more time. You could spend a lot more time thinking about adaptive leadership skills and thinking about for yourself about how you might want to, what skills you'd like to build, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to encourage you, did you get any kind of handout here in the last few days about the Leadership Academy for middle managers? Some people have already gone. Who's gone to one? Okay. If you have questions about it, this is a Children's Bureau program for middle managers in child welfare in states. And it rotates around the country. We do 5 a year in a particular region, so your region gets hit either this year or next year, basically. And there's a big piece on developing adaptive leadership skills, along with a bunch of other things in that really good curriculum. So if you have an interest in just improving your leadership skills in general, you should think about getting nominated for that from your state. And it's the National Child Welfare Workforce Institute, ncwwi.org. And you can find out when things are and how you apply and all of that. So thank you for your time late in the day.